And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out of my Spirit upon all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaidens I will pour out in those days of my Spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show wonders in heaven above, and signs in the earth beneath. Acts 2:17-19. In the hierarchy of holy relics, they are classified according to their importance. Relics associated with Jesus, particularly those related to the Passion of Christ, are obviously the most venerated. Next come relics associated with the Holy Family and the first disciples, and finally those related to martyrs and saints.
Christians were more or less persecuted over certain periods, particularly during the first 3 centuries after the birth of Jesus Christ. The first written document that speaks of the veneration of holy relics was the Acts of Saint Polycarp. Saint Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna in Asia Minor. He was executed toward the middle of the 2nd century. At the end of his Acts, which was actually a letter addressed to his followers, there is a passage that says that the remains of this bishop, this martyr, were gathered and buried at a specific place where it was hoped that, it didn't actually say it is hoped that, but you can read between the lines, that it was hoped that people would gather at this spot to commemorate his martyrdom.
These relics, many of which are of doubtful authenticity if truth be told, are usually preserved in churches, basilicas, and cathedrals. They are spread throughout the Christian world, and some are even purported to have extraordinary powers. Of all relics, the one with the most surprising qualities is without a doubt the blood of Saint Januarius, which periodically liquefies. The fate of Naples may depend on this small vial of blood and the annual miracle that takes place. I need to head to Naples in the hope that I will be able to witness this amazing event. According to legend, Saint Januarius, or San Gennaro as the Italians call him, was once the Bishop of Benevento, a small town about 50 kilometers northeast of Naples.
We have historical evidences and evidence of veneration of San Gennaro, who was a bishop of Benevento, a town near Naples, and was beheaded. It's believed it was beheaded in 305 AD, during a persecution by Emperor Diocletianus.
San Gennaro was a martyr, and he was killed in a volcano, Solfatara, and from that moment started one of the most important history of this city.
According to tradition, he was persecuted by Emperor Diocletian in 305 AD because he refused to renounce his faith. Supposedly, the bishop was pushed into a burning fire, but walked away unharmed. He was then put in a den of lions, but the wildcats were content to simply lick his feet. Getting desperate, Timotheus then beheaded Saint Januarius, and this time his efforts to kill the bishop were successful. As he was being executed, one of his followers allegedly collected some of his blood in 2 small glass vials.
All the parents of the Christian martyr preserve the blood of their son when killed. When San Gennaro was taken to catacombs, the blood liquefied.
For some time, these vials and the remains of the bishop's body were kept in the catacombs. Then, towards the end of the 13th century, after a few pilgrimages began, the relics, his blood and bones, were transferred to Naples, and Saint Januarius was declared patron saint of the city. In 1304, his remains were placed in a beautiful silver reliquary, a case that can still be seen in a crypt below the cathedral, which has since been renamed the San Gennaro Cathedral. It was shortly afterward that the miracle occurred for the first time.
Well, the legend says that when Saint Januarius was beheaded, part of his blood was collected and put into a vial. But actually, we have historical records showing that there was a veneration of this martyr during the Middle Age, but there is no absolute mention of the actual container of the blood until 1389. That means more than 1,000 years after Saint Januarius' death.
In 1389, during a ceremony held to venerate the relics, Saint Januarius's 1,000-year-old blood suddenly liquefied. What had been no more than dark coagulated blood, almost black in color, suddenly transformed into a bright red liquid. It was as if the blood had just been taken from his body.
And since then, the liquefaction took place 1 or 2 or 3 times a year, so for centuries.
Nowadays, the vials containing Saint Januarius's blood are carefully preserved in a silver and glass reliquary, which in turn is kept in a vault. One of the vials contains no more than a few drops of dried blood, and it is of no public interest. The second vial, on the other hand, is half full of a very dark red solid substance, almost black in appearance. 3 times a year, on key anniversary dates, the vials are brought into the chapel of San Gennaro, one of the cathedral's annexes, where the liquefying ceremony is held.
The spring procession is very important, is one of the most ancient procession, goes from the chapel to Monastero Santa Chiara. And I think this is the most important moment in which the people, Neapolitan people, belongs to San Gennaro.
I wouldn't want to miss this exciting event for anything in the world. Naples, the capital city of Campania on the Gulf of Naples. The city lies 250 kilometers south of Rome, in a volcanic region dominated by the presence of Vesuvius. Naples is also, without a doubt, the Italian capital of testosterone-pumped drivers. When they're behind the wheel, Neapolitan drivers only abide by one rule, and that's their rule. So here's a tip for foreign drivers. Unless you have 3 pairs of eyes and 4 hands, you'd best leave the driving to the locals. Arriving in Naples, I decided to get acquainted with the city's patron saint. What better than a visit to the museum to discover the city's history? The Museo del Tesoro di San Gennaro, otherwise known as the Museum of the Treasures of San Gennaro, takes up an entire annex of the cathedral. Although he was an important figure, this museum was not inaugurated until the 1980s. We have the present curator, Paolo Iorio, to thank for the initiative.
All these reliquaries and objects that are presented here are part, I suppose, of the treasury.
Of course.
And you mentioned before that it's just a small part of the treasury.
That's right.
How many parts do you have here, and how many objects do you have here, and how big is the treasury?
We have here the 20% of all the treasure. There are 21,000 masterpieces, and this is a small part, but it's a very important part.
It should be pointed out that San Gennaro was venerated for centuries, not only in Naples, but throughout all of Italy. All crowned heads of state and sovereign popes came to Naples to honor the saint. They often brought gifts with them on these visits.
Every emperor, pope, kings, queen that passed from Naples to gave something. This one from Maria Carolina. The other one, the green one, is from Umberto Vittorio Emanuele di Savoia. This one is from Maria Amalia di Sassonia. This Merle, the green one, the big green one, is from Carlo III di Borbone. The last cruise is from Giuseppe Bonaparte.
The brother of Napoleon.
The Napoleone, that's right. But every small stone is a gift of someone that passed from Naples.
There have been so many generous gifts over the centuries that the Naples Cathedral became the depository of a fabulous treasure. Gold pieces crafted by great masters, golden ornaments decorated with jewels, and tiaras beautiful enough to make any king envious. Then I was invited to attend the ceremony for which I had traveled close to 7,000 kilometers, the liquefaction of Saint Januarius' blood. Tomorrow is the first Sunday of May. We will be celebrating the anniversary of when Saint Januarius' remains were transferred to Naples in the 13th century. It is one of 3 annual dates on which the blood liquefaction ceremony is held. Early in the morning, volunteers prepare for the great procession which will carry the reliquary containing the vials of blood to the monastery of Chiara, a kilometer-long parade through the city streets. According to tradition, that is when the miracle takes place. At least that's what the population of Naples is hoping will happen.
I think that the real miracle are the people, are these faces that are waiting for the miracle. To be protected from natural events. I mean, we have one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world, Vesuvio. In all the ages, Vesuvio destroyed everything. Pompeii, Ercolano, and during the last war, 2 small towns were completely destroyed. And San Gennaro protects Naples even for the heartache. And we have had a lot of heartache here in this country. The most protection Neapolitan people ask to San Gennaro is against natural events.
If we are to believe the legend, the liquefaction of the blood is a form of blessing. It is said that on the rare occasions when the blood did not liquefy, the city was beset with terrible disasters. For 2 years in a row, in 1526 and 1527, the miracle did not happen. Each time, the city was struck by plague epidemics. Disaster struck once again in December 1943. It is reported that the blood was as hard as glue. 4 months later, Mount Vesuvius erupted, destroying harvests and killing around 100 people. The last incident of this kind happened in 1980. The blood remained in a solid state during the ceremony held on September 19th. On November 23rd of that same year, an earthquake shook the entire province of Campania, leaving in its wake 2,735 deaths, 8,850 injured, and 300,000 homeless. We can now understand why the faithful cross their fingers every time the vials are removed from the reliquary. Around 3 p.m., the chapel of San Gennaro begins to fill. Soon the reliquary stand is brought in, a beautiful gold stand made in the 14th century. Around 3:45, the priests move into position in front of the altar. They address the congregation, then everyone prays and contemplates. Finally, the reliquary containing the blood is brought forth. It is a circular glass case with a single handle. The 2 vials can be seen inside the reliquary. The Bishop of Naples presents the reliquary to those gathered in the chapel, then sets it down on the stand. The procession now gets into full swing. Followers leave the cathedral. Once outside, they're joined by hundreds of Neapolitans who move like a human tidal wave towards the monastery of Santa Chiara. In the middle of the procession, volunteers carry busts mounted on platforms. Jesus, the Virgin Mary, Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist, and of course, Saint Januarius. Naturally, the centerpiece of this parade is the reliquary containing the vials. There is a feeling of elation in the streets. From balconies overlooking the street, people are clapping, praying, and singing. Flowers are tossed on the procession as it passes by. The celebration is quite emotional. The crowd finally arrives at the monastery. The reliquary is quickly brought to the altar. It is time. Taking every precaution possible, the case containing the vials is removed. The blood is still solid. Then the ritual begins. Holding the reliquary by the handle, the bishop swings it back and forth from right to left. Nothing happens. You can feel the faithful begin to get a bit nervous. More prayers are delivered to Saint Januarius. The prelate swings the reliquary, still nothing. Some people start whispering, while others mop their brow. Is it the heat of the month of May, or are they worried? Suddenly, the miracle happens. The solid mass begins to move within the vial, like a blood clot slowly melting. Applause breaks out among the parishioners in the nave. You can sleep well tonight, citizens of Naples. Your city has nothing to fear, at least not until the next liquefaction. After the ceremony, the reliquary containing the vials is taken back to the Naples Cathedral, where a special mass is held. The faithful are invited to come forward and see the miraculously liquefied blood. They kiss the reliquary in a state of elation. The miracle of Saint Januarius has been confirmed. Humans have always been fascinated by death. Monuments have been erected in memory of ancestors, even to preserve their bodies, from ancient Egyptian mummies to Lenin's remains. It was through this worship of the dead that the idea of venerating relics was born. Paris, City of Lights. Near the d'Enfer Rochereau subway station lie the catacombs. As the inscription reads at the entrance to the underground tunnels, this is the kingdom of the dead.
On revoit continuellement cette image. Arrête, c'est ici l'empire de la mort.
Voilà. Yes, it was written by Abbe Delille.
C'est quand même une sorte d'avertissement un peu macabre. Oui.
Yeah, but it's pretty macabre here.
To compensate for population in the city's cemeteries and to deal with public health issues, the city made a decision in the 18th century to move bodies from the surface to underground quarries.
These used to be quarries outside of Paris, the Tomissoir quarries. It was here that they had transferred the bodies buried in the Saints Innocent Cemetery when it closed in 1785 under the king's orders. So, at a state council, the IGC was asked to find a spot where all of the bones could be placed so that they could empty the Saints Innocent Cemetery.
Some 6 million bodies were moved into alcoves, grouped by their cemetery of origin. Since then, the Paris catacombs have become a tourist attraction.
They use the word catacombs as a reference to the catacombs in Rome, where the first Christians were buried under the Vatican. Here, we have a municipal ossuary. People are not buried in the ground. We wanted to empty our cemeteries, but as a Catholic nation, we don't believe in incinerating human remains, and we needed to find a place to store them.
Every year, thousands of visitors wander into this dark, morbid underworld, all fascinated by the piles of white bones and skulls with empty eye sockets.
C'est quand même étrange cette fascination que les gens ont à visiter des lieux semblables. Parce qu'ici, faut pas avoir peur du mort. Ici, on est dans le morbide quand même.
On est dans la mort.
You're surrounded by death. There's definitely a sense of morbidity in the air. You can't be down here if you're claustrophobic. There are certainly a lot of health risks involved in venturing down to this highly sought-after spot. It's amazing how many tourists want to visit these catacombs.
Basically, once you move past the initial macabre feeling at the sight of all the bones, you can understand that the main function of cemeteries and carneries is to serve as a reminder of those who have passed. As you stroll through the cave, you can't help but think of the men and women who came before us in the adventure of life. No doubt the original intention of relic veneration was to serve as a reminder. In a document dating back to the 2nd century, one of the faithful says, "We gathered bones that are rarer than gold and more precious than the finest of gems. We placed them in a location that was suitable for them. May the Lord allow us to join here on the celebration day of his martyr." Over the years, martyrs' tombs have become sacred sites, or in Latin, loca sancta. Texts written towards the end of the 4th century show the development of belief in physical locations that radiate a sort of divine energy referred to as virtus.
It was the result of a fairly slow evolution, but there was a surge during the second half of the 4th century, where people witnessed miracles happening around the tombs of holy martyrs, the first saints. Then in the 5th century, actually, it began in the 4th century, there were also saints who were not martyrs. So it's very difficult to explain this belief in virtus, the miraculous power of relics. There is no real theology behind it, no exact explanation for this virtus, this miraculous power.
Relic veneration as we now know it was born. Arles is the 3rd largest city in Bouches-du-Rhône, and the community in France covering the largest area at 77,000 hectares. Its population is around 53,000, and many of the Roman monuments in the area have been included in UNESCO's prestigious list of World Heritage Sites. Such is the case for Constantine's thermal baths, built in the 4th century, and its amphitheater. It is still used in modern times to hold open-air concerts. But Arles is also one of the most important stops for pilgrims on the road to Santiago de Compostela.
It's the 2nd stop on the Via Tolosana, which is one of the main routes to Santiago de Compostela. It begins in the Elysian Cemetery at the Saint Honorat Chapel, which is not far off. The Elysian Cemetery was part of a huge necropolis, even before the Middle Ages. All that remains is a pretty street with chapels and the Church of St. Honorat, the vestiges of an abandoned old abbey. So for the purists of pilgrims, the journey begins there. It's about 800 meters away. Pilgrims would start their journey at St. Honorat and pass by here.
Since the Middle Ages, the Arles route has been one of the 4 roads that cross France and Europe on the way to Spain. So it's not surprising to find along this route one of the most important collections of relics in all of Europe. The Church of Saint-Trophime stands in the middle of Place de la République, in the heart of the old part of the city. The exceptional portal paints a fascinating picture of Judgment Day, heaven and hell, and Christ's blessings.
It is said that the main theme of the portal is Judgment Day, with a procession of chosen Christians going to heaven, while sinners are being cast into hell. Beyond Christ presiding over the final judgment, we see another Christ who is showing the path to salvation. He is offering blessings, seated in majesty in the tympanum, offering blessings and announcing redemption, the doorway to salvation, the church's door itself symbolically representing Christ.
Originally, the city's crypt built to store relics was below the church. In the 15th century, an extravagant Gothic choir was added. It was around that same time that the Chapel of Relics was set up, just to the left of the high altar.
Now, the presence of all these relics, in my opinion, I have no other explanation. I think there are so many relics because this is an important pilgrim stop on the way to Santiago. I personally think that the relics were placed in a location where they were likely to be seen and admired by believers.
It contains dozens of reliquaries, one of which holds the remains of Saint Januarius, a martyr who was decapitated in the 3rd century for having refused to sign a persecution order against Christians. The remains of Saint Trophimus, the church's founder, and the bones of the various bishops of Arles, Concordius, Saint Honorius, Saint Virgilus, and Saint Hilary. Arles is a good example of the politics of relics that existed in the Middle Ages. Not only did the holy remains ensure a certain divine protection, especially for the pilgrims who came to venerate them, but since contemplation of the relics was often accompanied by a cash donation, religious authorities were doubly blessed. Religious officials took care of people's souls, while lay officials took care of their money. An effective team where all players came out a winner. Looking back, it is hard to imagine the attraction that the contemplation of these objects generated. Entire communities would no doubt have been completely overlooked had it not been for the importance of their relics. Such was the case for the extraordinary town of Conques. Conques lies in the Aveyron department, in the Midi-Pyrénées region of France. The community, with a population of just over 300, developed around its abbey, for which construction first began around the 8th century. The community grew thanks to a young girl who lived in the 3rd century, Sainte Foy.
She was a young saint who was tortured in the year 303 because she was Christian. She lived during the reign of Emperor Diocletian, who declared that all citizens should pray to Roman gods, which she refused to do. She was tortured to death with a red-hot brazier.
On October 6, 303, she was tortured and beheaded. She was only 12 or 13 years old. She was worshipped by all of Aquitaine, and her relics soon gained the reputation of being miraculous. That was when the town of Conques was placed on the map.
It wasn't until 4 centuries later that a monk from Conques sought them out in Agen and obtained the relics through a pious transfer that took place out of the public's eye. It was totally acceptable at the time. Relic trading was just another aspect of relic veneration. Gradually, after Saint Foy's relics arrived in Conques, many reliquaries were built, since the custom was to divide relics in such a way that they could be easily carried around during processions.
Not long afterward, given the importance of Sainte Foy's relics, Conques became a major stop on the road to Santiago de Compostela.
Yes, it's true. Conques was a stop along the road to Santiago de Compostela, starting around the 11th or 12th century. Since it was mentioned in the first guidebook ever written for pilgrims, Pilgrim's Progress by Amory Picot, in the 12th century, pilgrims felt obliged to stop in Conques. In the Middle Ages, pilgrims performed their devotions as they did their pilgrimage. They were obliged to stop at religious sites, particularly at recognized pilgrimage stops. And Conques was the ultimate stop for any pilgrimages devoted to Saint Foy. Conques had possessions throughout France and also in Europe, and Conques was geographically located on the former Roman highway which led from Puy to Cahors. So it was practically automatic that it became a stop along the road to Santiago de Compostela, and still is to this day.
Nowadays, the community continues to attract visitors from all over Europe. But now, it's the town itself, considered to be one of the most beautiful in the world, that is the main attraction. As I arrived in Conques, my first impression was that I had landed in the middle of a film set. It was as if I had been transported into a Three Musketeers movie. Most of the houses still had their original medieval look, and the quaint streets too narrow to drive on added to the enchanting feeling of being in another place and time. Anne Romiguière of the Conques tourist office took me to the treasure room. This room was specially prepared in one of the abbey's wings. Here, the word treasure doesn't just signify the material and artistic value of the object. It also signifies the religious importance given to the contents of the richly decorated wooden cases. All of these remarkable objects could have easily disappeared like many others did during the French Revolution.
The French Revolution played a significant role in the destruction of relics, since the revolutionaries were madly seeking out anything made from gold or silver to finance their revolution. Many relics were inventoried and melted down at the Paris Mint. Here in Conques, the population rose up in protest, starting with the womenfolk, when the commissioner arrived in town, which helped to save the treasure for a while. It was then protected thanks to a plot by underground priests. During the night, with the assistance of a few faithful friends, they snuck into the church, broke the locks on the choir gate, and each took a reliquary, which they hid in their homes, some outside of the town, others within the town limits. The large processional cross, which we might see later, I'll point it out to you, was hidden in a chimney, for example. They continued to be hidden until Napoleon returned to power and re-established the right to venerate relics.
Once peace was restored in France, all of the precious objects were returned to their proper place in the church. And what beautiful objects. Of all the collections of holy relics that I've been privileged enough to view, the Conques collection is undeniably the most beautiful. It includes an amazing medieval processional cross decorated with figures, one of which is the silhouette of Sainte Foy as a young girl. On the lower part of the vertical bar bearing a figure of Jesus Christ, you can find a hole where the relics of the true cross are kept. There is also a spectacular relic representing the arm of Saint George.
Saint George is a monk from Conques who became Bishop of Lodève in the 9th century. They removed his arm and placed it inside the case, and then they set the reliquary beside a symbol of Jesus Christ blessing it. As you can see, his hand is positioned as if he is giving a blessing. The ornate sleeve helps us date the relic back to the 13th century and has Jesus on the cross in the background.
It was in this collection of relics that I noticed the oddest of relics that I had seen to date. A small golden case referred to as the Chasse de Pépin holds many different relics, including Christ's holy prepuce. It's okay to be skeptical.
Parmi les reliquaires, celui-ci est magnifique. Il est à la fois magnifique, mais également un peu controversé par le contenu de la relique.
Yes, traditionally it was believed that this reliquary held Jesus' foreskin and umbilical cord. This reliquary has been designed and redesigned over the years. Here's a small plaque dating back to the 8th century. The reliquary was originally a gift from Pépin II, King of Aquitaine, grandson of Charlemagne, and it has been altered over time. Were the relics transferred to other reliquaries? No one knows for sure. Did the holy foreskin survive all these centuries? There's no way of saying for sure. What is really interesting is to note the shape of this reliquary. It has a traditional shape, a small box, and the box was decorated because anything that is a relic is automatically sacred and can't be kept in a plain old box.
Finally, a visit of the treasure would be incomplete without mentioning the extraordinary relic of Sainte Foy, the Grace of Conques. It is a surprising work of art representing Sainte Foy on a throne.
Le plus précieux, c'est celui-ci.
It's the most revered article of Sainte Foy and is the most sacred relic, her skull cap. Contrary to what some may think, it has not been placed on the head of the statue, but rather in a small opening at the heart. You can see the small door in front of it.
The overall shape of the relic is surprising. The disproportionate body, the firm and lofty expression on the face, and the shiny gold, gems, and enamels all give this reliquary a feeling of strangeness that has all led to it being qualified as an idol.
J'imagine que ce ne sont pas simplement des paysans qui ont fait don de ces pierres à l'église.
No, it's always the same story. I see it in the popular beliefs of many visitors who come here. They think that poor pilgrims were the ones who made sacrifices so that they could give gems to the church. Obviously, they were given by people who were well off, people who could finance the abbey and give thanks to Sainte Foy, or who gave offerings in the hopes of receiving an answer to their prayers. They gave their most valuable possessions. If you read the book of Sainte Foy's miracles in detail, you will see that people would often ask Sainte Foy for favors, and she would appear to them in their dreams. Since she was a young girl, around 12 or 13 years old, she would ask for a jewel in exchange for the favor, and people would accept that, telling themselves, she's a young girl, she likes to look nice.
Medieval devotees believed that the saint's power was transmitted through this reliquary. just as Neapolitans believed that heavenly energy is protecting their city through Saint Januarius's blood. But what if Saint Januarius's blood is nothing more than a skillful trick? At least that's what scientists are wondering. Let's begin by saying that no exhaustive study of Saint Januarius's blood has ever been conducted.
Most of the evidences about the behavior of this substance are anecdotal evidences. It means that this is what the performer of the ceremony, the bishop or whatever, says that he has seen. But very little scientific tests have been done in the last century, let's say.
So this is the lab. This is your lab.
This is my lab.
So, and these are the objects.
To do a proper study, we would need to take a sample of the vial contents, which would involve opening them. That is totally out of the question. So basically anything that we know at this point has been gained through visual observations. 2 analyses were performed with a spectrograph in 1902 and 1989. Many stories have been told about the liquefaction of the blood. According to one written account, the blood bubbled up and increased in volume to the point where it filled the entire vial.
One of the claims that have been done about the behavior of the substance is that, of course, it changes from solid to liquid, but also should change its color, should increase its volume, and should increase its weight, and it should boil or froth. Now, the change from solid to liquid is very visible. The frothing and the bubbling is probably simply a few bubbles of air that after a while come to the surface and give the impression that there is some boiling, but it cannot boil within a sealed container. The changes in color have never been documented by a spectroscopic means, of course, and the increasing in the volume has never been documented, for example, holding the relic level against a scale behind and film to see if the level goes up or down.
I didn't see anything of the sort at the ceremony that I attended. The blood simply changed from a solid state to a liquid state, occupying the exact same volume of space.
Our own hypothesis is that the substance is a thixotropic compound, and thixotropy is the property of certain gels to liquefy when they are shaken or bumped or moved mechanically. So we suppose that during the ceremony, when the relic case is repeatedly moved and picked up and put down again and turned upside down, actually to check whether the liquefaction took place or not, this will trigger the liquefaction, just simply moving the relic. And as to why sometimes it took longer and sometimes not, well, it all depends how the relic is handled, because if you move it very gentle, then it will stay solid. If you give a sharp blow or a small sharp movement to the container, then you will trigger the liquefaction. So this is why we should check very accurately, for example, by vibrating this relic case in a controlled way, how it behaves.
Not all materials have the same qualities for light absorption and reflection. These characteristics are so specific that by studying the way in which light reflects on and in matter, it is possible to determine the nature of the matter, even its components. In 1902, the day after the liquefaction ceremony, scientists from the University of Naples were given permission to shine a light through the vial. According to the researchers, the spectral signature obtained corresponded to that of blood.
Well, first of all, we should repeat the spectroscopy with electronic spectrometers because hemoglobin has a characteristic Soré band just beyond the visible range. This can be seen only with electronic instrumentation. And this would be diagnostic for the presence of hemoglobin or its derivatives.
At the Department of Chemistry at the University of Pavia in northern Italy, Professor Luigi Galleschelli thinks that he has found an explanation. At his invitation, I went to visit his laboratory, where I was given a true-life demonstration of how Saint Januarius's blood liquefies.
A few years ago, as an example of a possible thixotropic substance, we have produced a substance by using chemicals and procedures that were available in the Middle Age. And starting from a mineral that can be found only on the Vesuvius volcano, which is near Naples, and you dissolve this in water, and then you add calcium carbonate, which is a very common white pigment, basically chalk or marble powder. And then you purify this solution through a parchment, and you put it into a small bottle, and you add a pinch of salt, and you let it stay for a while, and it will solidify, and by shaking it will liquefy. And this process can be repeated several times.
Could it be that Saint Januarius's blood is nothing more than a clever solution prepared by an ingenious medieval alchemist?
It has the same behavior and the same color of the Naples substance, but of course this doesn't mean that we are sure that it is the same thing. It's an example just to show that there is a similar behavior and has a chemical physical explanation.
Now it remains to be seen whether the chemist's mixture can hold its properties for centuries to come. It also doesn't explain why Saint Januarius's blood does not liquefy every time. Is Saint Januarius's blood and its mysterious liquefaction properties a genuine holy relic, or one of the oldest religious hoaxes in history? For believers, the scientific argument just doesn't hold water. It is true that the blood has never been properly analyzed, and this fact leaves the door wide open as to the real nature of the vial contents.
Generally, it's rather difficult to do scientific tests on religious relics because of the protection of the church on these objects. But however, the church should be interested in understanding whether a relic is genuine or not. They should be obliged to study the relic because only a true relic should be venerated.
So why isn't it being done? Simply because faith does not need to be recognized by science in order to be expressed. When I was with Paolo Iorio, the curator of the Museo del Tesoro di San Gennaro, I asked him if he genuinely believed in the miracle of the blood liquefaction. His reply was instantaneous. I mostly believe in the power of attraction of Saint Januarius, and that's where the nuance lies. Each year, 3 times a year, Saint Januarius is a cause for splendid ceremonies, during which, luckily, the blood liquefies most of the time. When it's time for the miracle to happen, the city celebrates. In the streets, all you hear is people talking about the blood liquefaction ceremony, and everyone, even the skeptics, breathes a sigh of relief at the announcement that the blood has liquefied. When it's time for the miracle, Neapolitans all experience a feeling of unity. At those times, Saint Januarius is no longer a forgotten saint. He becomes the soul of the city. And in the end, aren't holy relics food for the soul? Or at least for those who believe that they have one.